Jackson sat alone at a table set for two, a perfectly sizzling, medium-rare slice of steak resting on the pristine plate before him. The first bite, once a symbol of triumph and self-validation, now carried distant echoes, hollow reverberations of a celebration he no longer felt worthy of. He chewed deliberately, the taste muted by a gnawing emptiness. A young server approached with quiet resignation in her eyes, too weary, too guarded for someone her age. She refilled his glass with practiced ease. Her voice, measured and surprisingly soft, offered, "Enjoy your meal," barely louder than a whisper. Her fingers brushed against the table as she slipped something beneath his plate, a small, folded note. Jackson's instincts jolted awake. Nobody else noticed. He slid it into his palm beneath the table. Opening the note, his breath caught. The letters were jagged, unfamiliar, errant. His chest tightened as he deciphered the message. "I know who you are, and I need you to understand, this place is killing us." The word stopped time. The steak's sizzle vanished, flavor drained from the meat and from him. A sudden, suffocating silence filled the air. Looking up, he found only an empty floor where she'd stood. What kind of empire had he built if it could deliver meals this flawless while quietly crushing the souls who crafted them? Swallowing hard, not the steak, but the first bitter bite of truth, he stared at the message, reading it over and over. Each repetition scorched deeper. "I know who you are." He gripped the table's edge until the linen crumpled beneath his hand. Something inside him trembled, unsettled, as if the letter had awakened a locked memory. He saw a flash, a magazine cover, his face, unyielding eyes, a tagline he once whispered aloud with pride, now twisted into silent mockery. Jackson folded the note with reverence and slipped it into the pocket of his suit jacket, as though it required protection. He didn't touch the steak again. Rising without a word, he walked through the glowing chandeliers, the ornate doors he'd commissioned, emblazoned with his name. But no one stopped him. No one cared. Outside, the night air struck him colder than anticipated. He pulled out his phone, tapped the voice recorder, and spoke in a hushed tone that seemed meant just for himself. "Jackson, begin." Not a command, not a strategy, just a seed of intention, uncertain but living. He clipped the phone back into his coat and moved into the darkness, directionless but compelled. He didn't know where he was heading. But one truth rang clear. If that note was genuine, everything he believed about his business, its purpose, its power, had been built on rusting foundations. He returned to the stillness of his penthouse. The lights stayed off, leaving the city's glow to bleed through the windows. The note lay open on the table like an accusing shadow. He booted up his laptop and opened his inbox. Anonymous messages spilled out. Unfair scheduling. "No sick leave." "I can't breathe in this place." Over and over. "If you worked here 3 days, you'd quit too." Each email reflected a face he had chosen not to see, a reflection of neglect. He clicked open a video file titled Archives. His own voice filled the screen. "I don't build comfort, I build results. The moment you soften, you lose control." He let it play, then rewind, watching the certainty in his gaze, the conviction in his tone. Success demands no apologies. He laughed softly, sharp and cynical, an involuntary reaction to the dissonance. Then he muted the video. His image continued, talking, moving, but fell silent in the darkness of his room. In that stillness, two versions of himself shared the space, the architect of control and the man realizing the foundation may be flawed. He closed the laptop and walked toward the open closet. There, in perfect order, stood tailored suits, from midnight navy to charcoal, crafted Italian pieces never worn without cause. Perfume flacons stood untouched, full of potential yet untouched by time. But tucked in a corner, nearly forgotten, lay a pair of worn jeans, frayed, faded, and beside them, a simple button-down shirt. The uniform he had abandoned long ago, the clothes he wore when he had nothing but questions. He reached for them. The fabric was rough, authentic. He changed deliberately, movement by movement, shedding layers he hadn't admitted he'd worn. From the top drawer, he retrieved a small set of keys, scratched, modest. They belonged to his old Honda Civic, a vehicle he had once mocked. And yet, after a hastily made phone call to an old friend, it was his again. He pocketed the keys. No briefcase, no company ID, no mantle, only the lean simplicity of a man forced to listen. In the mirror, he caught his reflection. Not an ending, but a turning point. Tonight, he would not go as the boss. Tonight, he would go as a question. A man willing to bear uncertainty in pursuit of the answer. He stepped into the night. The city unfolded in shadow and light. Glass towers and streetlights blurred in wet pavement reflections. He passed Brooks' Steakhouse. His tagline, his pride, once adorned the sign. Now it gleamed above him as just another facade. He brushed past it, swallowed by quiet anonymity in a scratched Civic. He turned onto a familiar street, once traveled with ambition, now unknown territory. The steel headquarters loomed, silent and imposing. But he didn't slow down. He didn't glance back. In that instant, he surrendered visibility, chasing instead the gravity of invisibility. Curiously, it felt more real. Ahead, the original Brooks, Chicago, stood bathed in warmth, the birthplace of his dream, and perhaps the site of its unraveling. Valets polished luxury cars, Porsches, Teslas, even a Rolls-Royce humming softly under pool table lights. He rolled down the window. The cold air rushed in, snapping him forward. The city, and its success, stared back. But tonight, he no longer saw himself in the reflection above Brooks. He only saw someone ready to listen, to rebuild from within, and to follow the faint, uncertain pulse of truth. Jackson pulled into a parking space half a block from the restaurant. The old Civic gave a stubborn cough before surrendering to silence. He stepped out into the chilled air, the city's heartbeat faint under his worn soles. No one turned. The valet didn't glance his way. It was like he didn't exist, and that was precisely what he needed. He pulled his jacket closer, the wind slicing through the seams like doubt. The folded note in his pocket rested just over his heart, a paperweight for everything unraveling inside him. The walk to the entrance felt longer than he remembered, and the building seemed taller, more imposing. But that wasn't new. What changed was his vantage point. For the first time in years, he was seeing this place, not from above, but from outside. This was the empire he had built, on grit, calculation, and ambition, fire in his gut, numbers in his head. But tonight, he brought none of that. He came armed with nothing but questions and an ache that refused to dull. He passed a group of sharply dressed executives outside, laughter loud and hollow in the evening air. They didn't look at him. He remembered being one of them. Quick smiles, sharper tongues, eyes always on the next win. Now he looked like someone they wouldn't even notice. And that was exactly the point. If he wanted the truth, he couldn't come as the king. He had to vanish into the background. He stepped through the doors. The polished marble floor reflected soft golden light. Smooth jazz murmured overhead, mingling with the smell of seared steak and butter laced with garlic and thyme. Everything looked untouched, yet something felt irreversibly altered. No one lifted their heads, no second glances, no whispered recognition. The hostess greeted him with the kind of smile trained into muscle memory, pleasant, professional, hollow. "Good evening. Welcome to Brooks. Do you have a reservation?" He nodded once. "Yes, under Thomas." Her nails clicked faintly over the screen. "Right this way, Mr. Thomas." She pivoted with robotic grace, leading him into the heart of what used to be his world. Every detail gleamed. The staff moved like synchronized clockwork, efficient, silent, invisible. They passed a couple raising glasses in celebration, a group of men in suits scrolling their phones between bites of filet mignon. Jackson took it all in, every polished surface, every stiff smile. He'd requested a seat near the kitchen, strategically hidden, yet with a clear view of the gears turning behind the curtain. The hostess gestured smoothly. "Your server will be with you shortly." Then she was gone, leaving him alone in a theater he once directed, now watching as an unknown spectator. But he wasn't here for the meal. He was here for the truth, and it was already beginning to rise from the shadows. She approached like a dancer holding tension in her spine. Mid-20s, hair pulled tight, apron pristine. Her steps measured, practiced. Her voice was a warm echo dulled at the edges. "Good evening, sir. I'm Natalie. I'll be taking care of you tonight." Their eyes met briefly. Hers were unreadable, but not empty. She handed him the menu, and he noticed her fingers bore faint scars. Tiny burns at the tips, near faded, but not erased. He watched her shift her weight subtly onto one foot, a limp she tried to hide. Pain lived in her body, but her voice didn't betray it. "We take great pride in serving every guest," she said, placing the water before him with precision. "Our ribeye is the most requested, aged 28 days, flame-seared. But everything on the menu is worth trusting." Her smile held a flicker of effort, a flicker that didn't quite make it to her eyes. Jackson studied her, not with the gaze of a boss, but with the eyes of a man trying to unlearn what power had taught him. This woman had memorized her lines, perfected the dance. But the silence beneath it all? That was the truth he'd come to find. "I'll have the ribeye. Medium rare," he said quietly. She nodded. "Excellent choice." As she turned, he saw the smallest shift in her. Shoulders tensing, breath drawing in deeper than necessary. A moment of fatigue buried in motion. The thread was unraveling. Natalie returned moments later, notepad in hand, posture flawless despite the fatigue that flickered in her eyes. "Have you dined with us before?" she asked with a curious tilt of her head. Jackson nearly said it. "I know this menu by heart. I wrote it." The truth hovered at the edge of his lips, but he caught himself. "No," he said. "First time in a town. A colleague recommended the ribeye." Something in her expression softened. Barely. Not joy. Something closer to recognition. Maybe even gratitude. Her voice lowered slightly. "Your colleague has good taste. That's our signature. Dry-aged, caramelized crust, finished with rosemary butter. Pairs beautifully with the house red." He nodded. "Let's do that. Medium rare. And the wine." "Excellent," she said, scribbling the order with grace. Jackson watched her walk away, noting how she carried her fatigue with elegance, how her body obeyed the rules even when her soul had long grown tired of them. The paradox weighed on him. He had built this machine, had insisted on that pairing during tastings, demanded that tone of voice, that posture, that polish. And now he sat beneath it all, foreign in a world he once owned. He looked around. The restaurant buzzed quietly with elegance. Water glasses shimmered, silverware glinted, conversations murmured beneath the jazz. But now, he saw things he'd never seen before, or had chosen to ignore. A waiter smiled, but Jackson saw the tightness in his jaw. Another cleared a table with mechanical speed, eyes never lifting, shoulders rigid. By the bar, two servers whispered for a heartbeat, then snapped apart like they'd broken a rule. No one faltered, no one cracked. But Jackson felt the entire place holding its breath. These weren't people thriving, they were enduring. His vision, once a thing of pride, now resembled a stage held up by invisible strain. He leaned back in his chair and scanned the room, reading not the design, but the people. Spines curved with fatigue. Eyes darted to the clock. feet never still. It wasn't chaos, it was a system operating just below collapse, and he had designed it that way. The ribeye arrived like a performance. Dark crusted edges, pink center glistening with juice. Rosemary melted into the butter with surgical precision. The plate was flawless, almost sacred. Natalie's hands were steady, but Jackson caught it, a momentary tremor. The plate nearly slipped. She gripped tighter. No eye contact. Just a nod, then retreat. Her steps felt heavier, as if each one cost more than the last. Jackson stared at the plate. Everything on it had once represented excellence to him. Years of testing, refining, crafting the experience down to the finest detail. He sliced the steak, the texture perfect. Juices bled beautifully. He placed the bite in his mouth and tasted. Nothing. Not because the food was wrong, but because something inside him had frozen. The wine followed, rich, bold, full of legacy, but it scratched like glass. He couldn't swallow. This is what I built, he thought. This plate, this perfection, that exhaustion in her hands, and now I can't even taste it. The pain didn't sit in his stomach. It lodged higher, in his chest, pressing like grief. Like a symphony he once orchestrated now playing behind a curtain of bloodied bows. He looked up, and for the first time, he didn't see success. He saw sacrifice. The perfection that once symbolized everything Jackson had built, precision, pride, promise, now felt cold. Not excellence, but emptiness disguised in polish. A sterile cathedral erected on silent sacrifice, and suddenly, it hit him. This perfection hadn't been achieved. It had been extracted. Someone had paid for it with their bones, their breath, their joy. Natalie returned with a smile, soft around the edges, expertly rehearsed. "Is everything all right, sir?" she asked, her voice dressed in warmth, but frayed at the seams. Jackson looked closer, her eyes, rimmed in red, dry from long shifts and longer nights, held the weariness of someone who gave more than she ever got back. He nodded, then paused. Something in her demeanor made him lean in, not to pry, but to understand. "Have you worked here long?" She hesitated, not to guard a secret, but to weigh whether the answer even mattered. "Almost 2 years," she said at last, with a kind of tired pride. "Since I moved here." Jackson watched her, closely. "Do you like it?" She chuckled, a sound shaped like laughter but empty of light. "I love serving people. I really do." Then a breath, a pause that pressed on both of them. "But I think this job stopped loving me back a while ago." Jackson's heart didn't race. It sank. That sentence landed like a note played in a minor key, unmistakable and unresolved. Like a child softly saying they no longer believed in home. He had no answer. Nothing he could say would make it better. It wasn't a complaint, not even bitterness. Just a truth, wrapped in quiet grace. Natalie tucked her notepad under her arm. "Let me know if you need anything else." Then she walked away, and her words stayed, louder than any angry review or negative report. They echoed across the tile and inside his chest. "I love it, but it doesn't love me back." He used to believe passion could fix anything. But what happens when passion crashes into indifference? He watched her move from table to table, still offering warmth, connection, remembering names, laughing at jokes, leaning in for whispered updates on grandkids and birthdays. She was the thread holding joy in the room, but Jackson saw what lay beneath. Her steps stuttered just slightly at times. Her hand drifted toward her lower back between refills, not a stretch, not a groan. Just a private gesture to pain that had long stopped asking for permission. She straightened each time with the same practiced smile. Reset, reframed, untouched by design. But Jackson saw it now, and something stirred inside him. Not guilt, yet. Confusion, maybe. A crumbling at the edges of the narrative he'd clung to. He remembered once telling a camera, Our staff are like clockwork, disciplined, precise, proud. But Natalie wasn't precise. She was pushing, not a machine, a person too exhausted to rest. In his mind, he scribbled a truth. She's not performing. She's enduring. And for the first time that evening, a question crawled into his chest. How much suffering had I mistaken for pride? Then came a sound that shattered the quiet, the sharp crash of glass on hardwood. A waiter, barely more than a teenager, stood frozen, tray overturned, water soaking into his sleeves. "Marcus!" a sharply dressed woman snapped from a nearby table. "Do you know how much this dress cost?" The boy stammered an apology, but his voice was small, shaking. His shoulders curled inward like he was bracing for a blow. Jackson saw it all, the fear, the shame, the wordless plea to vanish. The manager appeared, her voice surgical in its chill. "This is the last time, Marcus." The boy nodded quickly, a desperate, broken motion, then turned and disappeared through the kitchen doors, swallowed like smoke through a crack in the wall. Without thinking, Jackson rose to his feet. He didn't know why. He just knew something inside had cracked open. He moved quietly toward the service hallway, waited for the door to settle, then looked through. Behind a stack of dry goods, he saw Marcus curled on the floor, knees to his chest, one hand gripping the back of his neck, the other covering his face. His frame trembled, not loud, but deep. The kind of silent cry a person learns when they're taught that even grief has to be quiet in front of power. Jackson didn't step forward, didn't intrude. He just watched, and finally saw the truth of what his systems had birthed. Not growth, not excellence, but fear, fear in uniform. Elsewhere in the restaurant, Maria had just cleared another table, 2 bowls of soup, a sizzling rib plate, a mac and cheese untouched by a child too restless to sit still. She smiled with unwavering poise. But as she turned, she slipped her phone from her apron. Just a glance. Jackson saw the screen. A little girl, maybe 7, asleep at a kitchen table. Her school uniform too big, her head resting on a math book. The background cluttered with bills and sticky notes. It wasn't just a picture. It was a prayer. Maria touched the screen gently, as if she could reach through it and pull the child into a hug she couldn't give from here. "Excuse me." A sharp voice cut the air behind her. "Are you deaf or just rude?" Maria flinched, slid the phone away. "No, ma'am, I'm right here." She turned back, smile flawless. But Jackson had seen it, the weight, the ache, the delay in her eyes that numbers would never show. She poured water, adjusted silverware, apologized with perfect courtesy, but her eyes lingered on the empty glass, like something inside her wanted to disappear. Jackson's chest ached. He remembered boardrooms full of talk about margins and KPIs. He remembered saying, "We don't train attitude. We hire it." Was this what he meant? Employees so afraid to fall short that they learned how to hide heartbreak in the seconds between shifts. He looked at Maria's hands. Steady, practiced, quiet. A voice inside him whispered, "This isn't service, it's sacrifice." He drifted toward the kitchen. Steam curled into the air like smoke from some invisible war. At the grill, Diana worked the line. Sleeves rolled up, apron dark with grease and toil. Her breath came short and uneven. Another ticket printed. She didn't flinch, just wiped her brow with the back of her hand. She moved slower now, but still moved. Jackson stood at the service window, watching. Her hands shook, not enough to ruin the plate, but enough to betray the toll. Her face was calm, focused, almost proud. A younger cook stepped in beside her. "Chef, let me take the next one." She shook her head, not harshly, just real. "No time, not enough staff. I've got it." She turned back to the stove, and Jackson saw it. A flicker in her eyes. Not fear, not even pain, but a quiet rebellion against collapse. It wasn't fear she wore, nor fatigue. It was fight, not against the job, but against the limits of her own body. And in that flicker, Jackson was thrown backward through time. A memory bloomed with painful clarity. His mother, in their cramped kitchen, hunched over a simmering pot after her shift at the laundromat. One hand rubbing her back, the other stirring dinner. Her limp masked behind habit. Her face unreadable, resolved. The same look. The same war waged in silence. Diana flipped a steak with clenched teeth, refusing to pause, not because the food would suffer, but because if she stopped, everything holding her together might collapse. Jackson's throat tightened. This wasn't strength. It was duty laced with pain, and it wore the face of someone he once thought invincible. Moved by instinct, he stepped closer to the line. "I can help," he said softly. "I can bus tables, if that's what you need." Someone, without asking, handed him a towel. Another pointed vaguely to the corner where dishes waited. No one questioned him. No one cared who he was. That was the beauty of this place, and the tragedy. He blended into the grind like steam into the air. He moved carefully, stacking glasses, clearing plates, trying to mirror what he'd watched from behind the veil of ownership. But he wasn't made for it, not yet. The tray slipped. A knife clanged against the floor. A spoon bounced off the leg of a nearby guest's chair. The man turned, scowling. "Don't just stand there like an idiot," he snapped, brushing off his coat sleeve as if Jackson had dirtied it by breathing near him. Jackson opened his mouth to respond, but the words stayed. He bent, picked up the silverware, whispered, "Sorry." The floor manager stormed over, eyes already narrowed. "New guy," he said loud enough to cut the room in half. "You want us to teach you how to breathe too? Pick up the pace or pick up your jacket and leave." Cruel laughter followed. A waiter passed with a smirk, muttering something Jackson didn't catch. He lowered his eyes. No title, no nameplate, no safety net. Just trembling hands and a tray that felt heavier than truth. He stepped back into the shadows near the service station, clutching the tray like it might tether him to something real. This was the world he'd built. Streamlined, sharp-edged, relentless. A machine with no tolerance for error, no space for weakness, no grace. And now he knew what it meant to be small in an empire that bore his name. Later, he found himself seated on a crate in the break room, a paper cup of lukewarm water in his hand. The silence was different here, not peaceful, dense, oppressive. The air smelled like sweat and old floors. A fluorescent light buzzed overhead like a dying bee trapped in glass. His hand still trembled from the tray. Shame stuck to the back of his neck like humidity. A young man passed by, thin hoodie tucked under an apron, eyes sunken with exhaustion. He paused, glanced sideways, and leaned in. "First week?" he asked, barely audible. Jackson nodded. The boy offered a crooked smile. "Don't ask too many questions," he said. "People who do." He trailed off, then finished quietly. "Don't stay long." He walked away without waiting for a reply. Shoulders hunched, steps careful, like the ground might give out beneath him. Not with drama, but with the inevitability of wear. Jackson stayed seated, his back against cold metal. The kid's words echoed, not because they were loud, but because they were honest. Don't ask too many questions. He used to say the opposite, celebrate curiosity in interviews, praise it in training. But here, inside the guts of the place, people weren't learning how to lead. They were learning how to shrink, how to disappear just enough to stay useful, how to ache without being noticed. That wasn't growth. That was compliance forged in fear. He sat at the edge of the break table, staring at a half-eaten plate of rice and vegetables. A plastic fork rested in his fingers, light and unfamiliar, disposable, like the people who used them. Steam curled from a pot nearby. Someone laughed in the hallway, but the sound faded fast. His phone vibrated. He didn't check the screen. He already knew. He answered. "Jackson," came the clipped voice. We've been trying to reach you. Q3 reviews are tomorrow. We need to finalize projections. Where are you? Silence. Then sharper. Are you even listening? You've disappeared. You're not a field rep, Jackson. You're the CEO. In the background, the chaos of the kitchen pulsed, clattering trays, barking orders. A second voice cut in. Is that a kitchen? Where the hell are you? Jackson looked around. Stained walls, a dented water cooler, tired faces eating fast, speaking little, moving like the world could fall if they did. He didn't reply. He ended the call, not out of defiance, but clarity. There was nothing to say that would be understood. He placed the phone face down on the table, picked up his fork again. For years, he'd answered every request instantly, every demand with urgency. He was trained to believe silence was weakness. But right now, silence felt like the loudest thing he'd ever spoken. He stayed seated. Still hungry, but not for food, for something no quarterly report could measure. Back at his table, the dinner rush had softened into an afterglow. A slower rhythm. The air calmer. Natalie stood nearby, clearing his plate. Her movements had changed. Slower now, not careless. Just the kind of tired that stopped asking for permission. She exhaled softly as she lifted the plate, then looked at him. "Thank you for dining with us," she said. Her voice still carried that crafted tone, but beneath it, curiosity, maybe even understanding. Jackson smiled. Not the one he used for PR. Not the one reserved for press releases. A real smile. "Thank you," he said, voice low. "For everything." Their eyes met. Just long enough to matter. Just short enough to remain unspoken. Then she slid something beneath the empty plate. A folded note. Smooth, subtle, creased softly at the corners. She said nothing. Didn't linger. Just turned and walked away. Her steps quiet. Measured, like nothing had happened. But something had. Jackson didn't move. He sat still, staring at the edge of the paper like it might speak first. The restaurant continued. Cutlery clinking, someone laughing near the back, a birthday song starting softly. But Jackson heard none of it. All he heard was the whisper of choice, and the paper waiting to be read. The glow of the restaurant dimmed into closing hour calm. Most guests were gone. The city outside the window breathed more gently now. The world felt quieter, like even it had been holding its breath. He picked up the paper, his hands steady all night, now trembled faintly. Not fear, not anxiety. Something older, something like being seen. He unfolded the note. 4 lines, neat handwriting, measured, deliberate. "I know who you are, Jackson. No threat, no accusation, just a truth," placed gently in his hands. "I've watched you all evening, and I kept serving you like everyone else, because I don't believe you're a bad man. Not yet." His breath caught. He read it again. And again. The words weren't a warning, they were a door. "But if there's still a person left in you, meet me. 11 p.m. after shift." Back entrance. His vision blurred as tears built quietly. Not from sadness, from something older, the fragile tremor of recognition. She had seen through everything, the disguise, the guilt, the silence, and still, she had waited. She had given him a choice. He folded the note carefully, pressing the crease with care. He didn't move, but something inside him did. Not shame, not fear, hope, sharp, quiet, unexpected. Outside, the night air had thickened, the street quiet. But inside Jackson, everything roared. Her words still echoed. "I don't believe you're a bad man." "Not yet." He stepped into the car, started the engine. Cold air burst from the vents, but sweat still clung to his spine. He drove. No destination, just movement. Street lights spilled across the windshield like melted stars. The GPS stayed silent. His thoughts weren't. If someone finds that note, she could lose her job. If someone saw her watching him, she'd be reported, removed. The board could bury the story, shut the restaurant, silence everything to protect the brand. And still, she had written the note anyway. She had chosen belief. Now it was his turn. The machine would protect itself. It always had. That's the way Jackson had built it. Self-sustaining, self-policing, relentless. But she knew that. And still, she placed the note. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. He could vanish now, slip away before 11, pretend the night had never happened. Let the system keep humming its illusion of success. He could disappear to protect her, or to protect himself. But then what would continue? The shaking hands, the forced smiles, the silent heartbreak echoing through dish pits and stockrooms. He pulled over, shut off the engine, and sat still. And for the first time in years, he didn't know which would cost more, truth or silence. At 10:55 p.m., Jackson stood in the alley behind the restaurant. A forgotten seam between lives, one side glimmering in polished gold, the other damp with grease and grit. The air bit at his cheeks. A street lamp above flickered like it too, couldn't decide whether to stay. The door creaked open. Natalie stepped out. No apron, no badge, just jeans, a faded sweater, and wind-tousled hair. The version of herself that existed only in absence, when no one needed her to smile. She didn't greet him with charm, just a steady presence. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said softly. "I wasn't either," Jackson replied. "But I couldn't not." The space between them was charged. Not romantic, not theatrical, just fragile. Heavy with everything that might crumble if they chose the wrong words next. A siren passed in the distance. Somewhere, a train rumbled. But here, in this alley of truths, the world held its breath. Natalie didn't build up to it. She didn't need to. "Maria has a daughter," she said. "She hasn't had dinner with her in 3 weeks, always the closing shift, always covering someone else." Jackson said nothing. Marcus studied programming, wanted to build apps for his mom. Night shifts made him fail his exams. Her tone didn't accuse. It simply endured. "Diana's husband died last spring. She asked for 3 days off. She got 1. Every word fell like a stone into still water, quiet but deep. "I didn't write that note because I was desperate," she said. "I wrote it because they can't." She crossed her arms, not defensively, just to steady herself. "I get it. The system's efficient, profitable, but people are breaking under it, and no one at the top ever asks why." Jackson didn't speak. There was no corporate empathy script for this, no prepared line. So he did the only thing he hadn't done in years. He listened. "Why don't you leave?" he asked quietly. Natalie didn't blink. She looked at him like someone who had already rehearsed this question 1,000 times. "Leave and go where?" she replied. "Do what?" Her laugh was small, brittle. "This place. It's the only thing that's kept me afloat. Barely. Some weeks it feeds me. Other weeks, it just doesn't drown me." Then came the quiet. "The thing is, it's also killing me." Her words didn't crack. They landed like settled dust. Rehearsed, accepted, unflinching. "I wanted to be a nurse." Jackson looked up. "I got in, 3 times, but I had to defer. Rent came first, groceries. My sister got sick. The car broke down. There was always something, always more urgent than dreams." She glanced past him, out to the dark skyline beyond. "I don't need luxury. I just want to live without flinching every time my phone buzzes. I want to breathe, eat dinner, sleep through the night without 5 alarms, not feel like every year I give is traded for someone else's quarterly gain." Her voice wavered, but only slightly, just enough to prove it still hurt. Jackson didn't speak. He couldn't, because in that moment, her life, so invisible in spreadsheets, had become impossible to ignore. The night fell heavier around them, a silence thick with unspoken choices. Jackson didn't step forward, didn't plead. He just looked at her, with something new in his gaze, something raw. "If I wanted to change things," he said carefully, "would you help me?" Natalie didn't rush her answer. "This isn't about helping you," she said. "It's not about me either." She stepped closer, not with warmth, but with truth. "If you want to understand what's broken, it won't come from me alone." Jackson nodded. This time, no hesitation. "I don't want another report," he said. "I've read thousands, charts, metrics, trends, but none of them ever looked me in the eye." He paused. "I want to hear from people, from the ones living what I never bothered to see." She held his gaze, long, sharp, real. Then, finally, "All right." She glanced toward the back door, where cleaning crews still scrubbed away the day. "Tomorrow night, come back." She started to walk away, then stopped. "But if you come," she said without turning, "come ready to hear things that'll make you wish you hadn't." Jackson didn't flinch. "I hope they do." At 1 a.m., the kitchen was quiet, but not still. Pans soaked in cold sinks, the floor half mopped. The smell of fryer oil clung to the walls like memory. 8 employees remained. No uniforms, just people. Collapsing into chairs, unlacing shoes, sipping water, sharing silence that had weight. Natalie stood at the center. "This," she said clearly, "is Jackson." A pause. "The CEO." No applause, just glances. One person stood straighter. Another crossed their arms. Someone scoffed. From the back, "Here to collect some sob stories for your next campaign?" Jackson stepped forward. Not aggressively. Not as a leader, just a man holding his truth. "No," he said. "I'm here because everything I believed is breaking. I'm not trying to fix the brand." He looked at each of them. No blink, no script. "I want to fix me." Silence, but not the kind that ends conversations. The kind that starts them. A woman leaned forward. Her hands red from dish soap. Eyes full of long shifts and short breaks. "You think showing up for one night changes 20 years of silence?" "No," Jackson replied. "But it might be where change begins." The room didn't soften. Not yet. But no one walked away. Because for the first time, the man behind the curtain wasn't holding a speech. He was holding stillness and waiting for the truth. Maria spoke first. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't ask for sympathy. She simply told the truth. Maria didn't cry. She didn't need to. She spoke like someone retrieving a memory buried deep, not because she wanted to, but because it was time. "There were nights," she said, "when I ate instant noodles in the bathroom. It was the only place no one rushed me. My only 10 minutes to breathe." Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I asked to switch one shift. Just one, so I could take my final exam," he said, voice flat, hollow. "They told me if I couldn't commit, I shouldn't bother coming back. So, he didn't." Diana, steady and older than the rest, pressed her palms into her thighs. Her hands trembled slightly. Her eyes did not. "Every morning," she said, "I stand in that kitchen praying I'll faint, just so someone will notice, just so I can stop." They weren't trying to break Jackson. That wasn't their aim. This wasn't performance. It was truth. Truth wrapped in restraint. In the invisible heat that rises from a stove. Not seen, but burning. Jackson stood frozen. He'd read endless data reports, exit interviews, performance metrics, but none of them felt like this. This wasn't feedback. It was the ache of people who had carried too much for too long. They didn't want apologies, or promises, or PR campaigns. They just wanted to be seen, to be heard, to not be told, again, that they were replaceable. Jackson's eyes dropped. His hands hung open, useless. He lifted one slowly, pressing it to his face. Not to hide, but to hold something in that was threatening to break through. His shoulders shook, not dramatically, just truthfully. The quiet collapse of a man realizing his empire had been built on the backs of invisible pain. "I didn't know," he whispered, voice dry and cracked. "I didn't know any of this." Silence followed. Not hostile, just honest. Diana looked at him, still seated, still grounded in her own exhaustion, and said calmly, "That's the problem, Mr. Jackson." No anger, no raised voice, just the truth, laid bare. You didn't know, and you never asked. That landed harder than anything else, because it wasn't judgment, it was a sentence, and he had already been living it. No one consoled him, no one offered grace. They'd all reached their breaking points years ago. Now it was his. Jackson slowly lowered his hand. His eyes were red, his voice smaller than ever. "But I'm here now." And for the first time, that phrase wasn't an arrival. It was a surrender of ego, of control, of denial. He wasn't the CEO in that moment. He was just a man learning how to see. Later, as he drove through the blurred city lights, faces flashed in his mind. Natalie's calm defiance, Maria's quiet strength, Marcus's lost future, Diana's silent war. He pulled to the shoulder. Silence enveloped him. He opened the voice recorder, pressed record. A pause. Then, "If you wake up tomorrow and think you've done enough, think again." He exhaled. "If you try to forget what you saw tonight, remember this. Someone is out there right now, burning their hands, wiping tables, holding back tears because of a dream you stole to fund your own." Another beat. "Don't go back to sleep." Click. The recording ended. And with it, a version of him did too. It wasn't redemption. It was responsibility. And it had a cost. Before dawn, Jackson was already in his office. The desk, the smell of coffee, the skyline, all familiar. But everything felt different. No quarterly projections on his desk, no strategy decks, just personnel files, the ones he'd skimmed 1,000 times. Now he actually read them. Mariah, her photo clipped to the front. In the margin, his own handwriting. 3 children. Never late. Works double shifts. Diana, husband passed. Denied bereavement leave. Marcus, dropped out of college, still shows up early. He paused, then reached for the towering stack of financial reports on his left. One by one he folded them shut. Neatly, precisely. He slid them into the bottom drawer and locked it. Not because numbers didn't matter, but because, for once, they weren't the only thing that did. He turned back to the files. This time he didn't read like a man measuring performance. He read like someone who remembered what it meant to care. At exactly 8 a.m., the boardroom filled. Suits rustled, laptops opened, pens tapped. Everyone expected business as usual. Jackson entered without a laptop. Just a small stack of folders. He didn't sit at the head. He stood. "I won't be presenting financials today," he said. Brows raised. Confusion flickered. "I'm presenting people." Silence. He opened the first folder. Maria, line staff, 3 children, never missed a shift. Eats dinner alone most nights, not because she wants to, but because she has to. Next. Carlos, line cook. Denied time off for wrist surgery, still cooking, still in pain. Back straightened. Glances exchanged. Jackson continued. Voice steady. Not dramatic. Every quarter we celebrate productivity. But what about the cost to the people producing those numbers? He looked around the table. These stories aren't exceptions. They're the rule. The rule we wrote. A pause. Then a voice from the back, firm. "We're a business, Jackson." Not a charity. Jackson let it sit, then answered, calm. "How much profit does it take before we can afford to stop being cruel?" No reply, so he held up a sheet. "Our turnover rate, 78%. Recruitment and retraining last year, almost $2 million. He laid the paper down gently. "People don't leave because of money alone. They leave because they're exhausted. Invisible. Replaceable." Another voice asked, "What's your solution? Raise wages, slow service, cut margins?" Jackson met their eyes. "My solution, stop pretending we can squeeze our people forever and still expect them to stay." A pause. Investing in people doesn't make us weaker. It makes us last. Silence returned. But this one wasn't resistance. It was reckoning. This wasn't rebellion. It was strategy. The meeting stretched on. Some resisted. Some wavered. But in the end, they voted. Narrowly. A 3-month trial. Employee first policy. Beginning in Chicago. No applause. Just a silence full of consequence. As they left, one older executive lingered. He had watched Jackson rise, once admired his certainty. He looked at him now and said quietly, "You've changed." Jackson didn't smile. "I didn't change," he replied. "I just came back." A week later, the ripples reached the floor. Paychecks were heavier, not magically but intentionally. Real breaks were posted on the schedule, mandatory, protected. Some staff checked twice. No one cheered, but no one disbelieved. Jackson walked into the Chicago kitchen. No camera, no tie, just a man showing up. He didn't say much. "I used to walk through here without seeing you," he said. "I can't undo that, but I can learn, if you'll teach me." No one clapped, but Maria handed him an apron. Marcus slid over a cutting board. Diana nodded once. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. Maria left before dark that day. Her daughter met her at the school gate. They shopped for apples and grapes. Marcus returned to class. His screen lit up with code. Diana mentored a new hire, her voice steady. No speeches marked these moments, but they mattered. Not just because of the money, because they got their time back, their dignity. And from that, a human spring began to bloom. Natalie sat beside Jackson at the bar. She placed a sheet of paper between them. Her class schedule, nursing program. "I've enrolled," she said. Jackson smiled, slow and careful. "Not postponing this time." "No," she said. "Not this time." She paused, then added, "Not because of you." He nodded, but she continued, "Because I didn't give up on myself. But you reminded me that people can still change." He raised his glass, not to toast, but to acknowledge. "I guess we both did our jobs." Her smile was strong, fierce, real. Later, Jackson sat in the same boardroom. A video played on the screen. His younger self. "Success is the absence of sentiment." He didn't watch the rest. He shut it off. For a long while, he sat still. Then, he opened his recorder. "Message to myself," he said. "If you still believe that, don't open a restaurant, open a prison." Then he breathed, deep, clean, and let go. On the company's website, a small message appeared. No fanfare. "If you've ever gone unheard, now is the time to speak." Below it, a single question. "What do you see? What do you need?" No name, no login, just truth. Jackson stared at it, then clicked publish. No branding, just a door. Open, finally.